Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Beaufort County, South Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the time you're listening to this narration. The year was 1843, when Thornfield Plantation became the epicenter of a scandal whispered about for generations. When both Eleanor Thornfield, the colonel's wife, and their 18-year-old daughter Catherine found themselves with child merely weeks apart, suspicion fell upon Solomon, a literate enslaved man who worked as the household servant. What began as hushed rumors erupted into accusation after a plantation ledger with damning entries was discovered beneath the library floorboards. The subsequent investigation would unearth a web of coercion, forbidden desire, and vengeance that challenged the foundations of the antebellum social order. Plantation records indicate that following these events, 3 individuals vanished without trace, their fates undocumented until 1921. The Thornfield plantation stretched across 800 acres of fertile South Carolina lowland, where long rows of cotton plants extended like white-capped waves toward the horizon, and the main house stood imposing upon a gentle rise overlooking the property. Colonel Jeremiah Thornfield, a decorated veteran of the Seminole Wars and third-generation plantation owner, had inherited the estate from his father in 1835, expanding both the acreage and the number of enslaved workers to nearly 100 souls by 1843. The colonel's reputation in Beaufort society centered on his military bearing, shrewd business acumen, and extensive travels to Charleston and Savannah, where his cotton brokerage connections had made the Thornfield name synonymous with wealth throughout the region. His wife, Eleanor, 20 years his junior and daughter of a prominent Virginia family, was known for her delicate beauty and uncommon education. Frequently seen with books from her husband's extensive library, a rarity among plantation mistresses who typically concerned themselves solely with household management. Their daughter, Catherine, having recently celebrated her 18th birthday with an elaborate ball attended by the region's most eligible young men, possessed her mother's refined features but displayed a willfulness that local society matrons noted with disapproval in their correspondence. County records and personal accounts from neighboring plantations make particular mention of Solomon, an enslaved man whose literacy and intelligence had elevated him from field labor to the unusual position of household secretary, managing the colonel's correspondence and financial records during his frequent absences that, according to the household ledger later recovered from the estate, totaled more than 140 days in 1842 alone, leaving the Thornfield women in the daily company of the one man on the plantation who could engage them in intellectual conversation. Solomon had been purchased specifically for his literacy, a skill he had acquired secretly on his previous plantation, and which the colonel discovered during the slave auction when Solomon corrected a mathematical error in the transaction records, a display of intelligence that impressed Thornfield enough to pay nearly double the usual price for a field hand of his age and physical condition. The Diary of Eleanor Thornfield, discovered in 1905 during the renovation of what had once been the east wing of the plantation house, provides the most intimate glimpse into the beginnings of the forbidden relationship that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The fragmented journal, its leather binding cracked from age and many pages missing, begins in winter 1842 with entries describing her increasing loneliness as the days grow shorter and the colonel's absences longer. Eleanor writes of feeling a ghost in my own home, drifting through rooms filled with luxuries that bring no comfort, a sentiment that appears repeatedly throughout January and February. By March, Solomon's name begins to appear with increasing frequency, first in reference to books he retrieved from the library on her behalf, then in longer passages describing their conversations about literature and philosophy. Solomon possessed insights on Voltaire that surpassed those of any gentleman I encountered in Richmond society, reads an entry from April 12th, followed by the troubling observation that I find myself inventing reasons to summon him to the parlor when the colonel is away. A letter dated May 1843 from Margaret Whitmore, mistress of the neighboring Magnolia Hill plantation, to her sister in Charleston, preserved in the Beaufort Historical Society archives, mentions observing a most unusual familiarity between Mrs. Thornfield and one of their house servants during a spring garden party. He approached her directly to discuss some matter, writes Whitmore, without the customary downcast eyes or deferential posture expected of his station, and more disturbingly, Eleanor received his words with a smile I have previously seen reserved only for intimate acquaintances. By summer, Eleanor's diary entries become both more passionate and more cryptic, with references to moments stolen between the ticking of the clock and conversations that occur without words, in glances exchanged across forbidden boundaries. A particularly revealing entry from June states, "I have lived as a possession myself, passed from father to husband, admired but never truly seen, until now." S. looks at me and sees not the Colonel's wife but Eleanor herself, a woman with thoughts and desires of her own. This awakening is both salvation and peril. Catherine Thornfield's leather-bound journal, recovered in 1887 from a hidden compartment in her writing desk and preserved now in the University of South Carolina's special collections, reveals a young woman's dangerous obsession through entries that begin innocently before descending into calculated manipulation. The earliest mentions of Solomon appear in March 1843, when 16-year-old Catherine notes with apparent casualness, "Mother spends considerable time with father's secretary. Today I observed them discussing a volume of poetry for nearly an hour in the garden alcove. Their heads inclined toward one another in a manner that struck me as peculiar." Subsequent entries document Catherine's growing awareness of her mother's attachment to Solomon, with increasingly frequent observations of their interactions, often recorded with meticulous attention to detail, the exact duration of conversations, precise quotes overheard, and descriptions of subtle physical gestures exchanged. By April, Catherine's writings shift from observation to competition, with disturbing passages revealing her determination to capture Solomon's attention for herself. "I wore my blue silk today, the one that mother says brings out my eyes, and requested Solomon's assistance reaching a book from the highest shelf in the library." She writes on April 23rd, adding with evident satisfaction, "His hand trembled when it accidentally brushed mine." Court testimonies from 3 household servants, recorded during the subsequent investigation, describe Catherine's escalating strategies to engineer private encounters with Solomon, from claiming to need assistance with her studies to deliberately creating situations requiring his physical proximity. Hannah, a kitchen servant whose testimony was preserved in county records, reported that Miss Catherine would deliberately spill ink on her letters, then insist only Solomon could help her correct them, dismissing everyone else from the room. Most disturbing was the testimony of Ezra, an elderly stable hand, who recalled Catherine threatening to claim Solomon had acted inappropriately toward her if he refused to meet her privately in the garden house, a false accusation that would have resulted in severe punishment or death for the private, enslaved man. By June, Catherine's journal reveals her complete self-deception, interpreting Solomon's terrified compliance as genuine affection, writing with chilling detachment. "He resists his feelings for propriety's sake, but his eyes cannot lie. Beneath his careful words burns the same desire that consumes me." The testimonies of Thornfield Plantation's household staff, collected by a Charleston attorney in 1855 for a dispute over the estate's inheritance and later discovered in courthouse archives, provide the most objective perspective on the disturbing triangle that formed during the spring and summer of 1843. Mary Wilson, who served as head housekeeper for 15 years, described in her sworn statement the peculiar tension that pervaded the household, noting how the missus would find reasons to summon Solomon to the east parlor during the master's absences, while young Miss Catherine would intercept him in the hallways or library when her mother was occupied with household management. According to Wilson's account, neither woman appeared aware of the other's interest in Solomon, as they maintained perfect civility in each other's presence, even as each plotted to secure his company when the other wasn't present. The testimony of James Carter, a footman, reveals Solomon's increasingly desperate situation. I found him once behind the kitchen house, head in hands, muttering prayers for deliverance. When he saw me, he begged me to exchange duties so he might avoid the main house, but such an arrangement would have been impossible given his literacy was essential to the master's business. Multiple staff accounts describe Solomon's attempts to establish boundaries while navigating the treacherous well. Power dynamics, requesting to work in more public spaces, asking other servants to remain present during interactions with either woman, and inventing household emergencies to extract himself from dangerous private conversations. Particularly revealing was the testimony of Patience, Eleanor's lady's maid, who recalled overhearing Solomon's carefully worded rejection of Catherine's advances. He told her, "Miss Catherine, your attention honors me beyond my station, but would bring ruin upon us both." When she persisted, threatening to claim he had behaved improperly toward her if he continued to resist, I witnessed the moment he realized his impossible position. His face showed not desire but the terror of a man who understood he had become trapped between powerful forces that could destroy him regardless of his own choices. By July, kitchen servant Abigail reported seeing Solomon attempt to request reassignment to field work, a virtually unheard-of demotion that a literate house servant would normally avoid at all costs, only to have his request firmly denied by the estate overseer. Dr. William Blackwood's medical journal, discovered in 1887 among his grandson's effects and donated to the Charleston Medical Society, contains the first documentation of Eleanor Thornfield's pregnancy. Noting his visit to the plantation on the 12th of July, 1843, wherein he confirmed what the lady of the house had already suspected, Mrs. Thornfield exhibits all physical signs consistent with approximately 10 weeks gestation, Blackwood wrote, adding with evident surprise, and receives this news with remarkable composure for a woman who has suffered 2 previous miscarriages early in her marriage. The physician's notes continue with clinical observations regarding Eleanor's health, but include an unusual personal reflection. Something in the patient's demeanor suggests she has already reconciled herself to this development. Indeed, she displays neither the nervous excitement nor trepidation one typically observes in expectant mothers, but rather a serene certainty that borders on the unsettling. Eleanor's own diary, fragmentary though it remains, contains only one cryptic entry regarding this confirmation. "What grows within me now is not merely a child but a possibility of escape, a future untethered from the suffocating constraints that have bound me to this place." Just 16 days later, Catherine's journal reveals her own discovery, with entries that transition from initial shock to calculated triumph. "The persistent nausea these past weeks has revealed its true cause. I carry within me the most powerful secret imaginable," she wrote on July 28th, with subsequent pages detailing her elaborate plans to reveal her condition to Solomon before anyone else could discover it. "When he learns that I carry his child, he will surely recognize the depth of our connection and choose me over any other consideration," reads her entry from August 2nd. The handwriting growing larger and more emphatic as she continues, "Mother believes she maintains her iron grip on this household, but her authority will crumble before the undeniable reality I now embody." Most disturbing is Catherine's August 4th entry, which reveals her complete delusion regarding Solomon's feelings. "I observed him speaking with Mother in the library today, maintaining his careful mask of servitude while she issued instructions about correspondence. If only she could see how differently he looks at me when we are alone. Soon enough the entire household will understand where his true devotion lies." Neither woman's writings indicate any awareness of the coven other's condition, creating a powder keg of secrets that would ultimately detonate with the Colonel's return in late August. A letter dated August 27th, 1843, from Thomas Wentworth, a Charleston cotton broker and close associate of Colonel Thornfield, provides the first external account of the plantation owner's return from a 6-week business journey. "I accompanied Jeremiah home," Wentworth wrote to his brother, "and witnessed his transformation from weary traveler to jubilant, expectant father when Eleanor shared news of her condition. news I gather they had long desired after previous disappointments. The letter describes how Jeremiah ordered champagne with dinner and spoke animatedly of nursery preparations, but notes an abrupt shift in demeanor the following morning. I was preparing to depart when a commotion erupted upstairs. The colonel emerged from his daughter's chambers with a complexion gone deathly pale, dismissed the household staff with unusual harshness, and informed me my presence was no longer convenient. Sarah Johnson, a chambermaid whose testimony appears in county records, described the colonel's behavior in the days following as increasingly strange and frightful, noting how he took to pacing the hallways at night, pausing to listen at doorways, and entering rooms without warning at odd hours. Multiple staff accounts describe how Colonel Thornfield began interrogating household servants individually in his study, focusing particularly on the daily movements of his wife, daughter, and Solomon during his absence. The estate's overseer, James Harris, provided perhaps the most revealing testimony, describing how the colonel demanded access to all household records and correspondence from the previous 3 months, scrutinizing each document as if searching for evidence of some suspected crime. By September 2nd, Thornfield had begun what Harris characterized as obsessive observation of Solomon, reassigning the educated servant's duties to keep him in constant proximity. The colonel would watch him with unnerving intensity, Harris stated, asking him pointed questions about trivial household matters from weeks prior, then studying his face as he answered, like a man attempting to decipher a code hidden within ordinary conversation. The plantation ledger that sealed Solomon's fate was discovered by Colonel Thornfield on September 8, 1843, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the library where Solomon conducted his secretarial duties. This document, recovered intact during the 1921 archaeological excavation of the Thornfield estate and now preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society archives, appears at first glance to be a standard record of plantation expenses and cotton yields, but contains extraordinary marginalia written in a cipher that Professor Harold Jenkins of Columbia University later identified as a sophisticated adaptation of ancient Greek combined with numerical substitutions. The deciphered text reveals Solomon's desperate attempts to document the coercive nature of both relationships as a form of protection, with entries detailing specific instances when Eleanor Thornfield requested his presence in her private quarters under threat of sale to the rice plantations should he refuse her attentions. More disturbing are Solomon's accounts of Catherine's escalating manipulation, including her explicit threat to cry, assault, and see me whipped to death unless I comply with her demands. Archaeological evidence discovered alongside the ledger in 1921 included a small leather pouch containing 2 letters addressed to a brother in Massachusetts, never sent, in which Solomon describes his growing terror as both women began showing signs of pregnancy, writing, "I stand condemned regardless of my actions, for even my forced compliance will be seen as the gravest transgression when the consequences become visible." The ledger's final entries, written in increasingly agitated handwriting, detail Solomon's 3 unsuccessful attempts to escape the plantation in August, each thwarted by the heightened security Colonel Thornfield maintained to protect his property. The most revealing aspect of the document is Solomon's systematic recording of witnesses to key interactions, naming house servants who observed Catherine's pursuit or Eleanor's demands, suggesting he understood that his word alone would never stand against that of white women in Southern society. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, who led the 1921 excavation, noted in her analysis that Solomon's methodical documentation demonstrates remarkable foresight from a man who clearly recognized that history would record him as predator rather than prey unless he created his own counter-narrative, a narrative that, tragically, remained hidden for nearly 80 years after the events it chronicled. Court documents from Beaufort County, discovered during a 1975 courthouse renovation, include transcripts from interviews with 5 household servants conducted by local magistrate William Hargrove in October 1843, describing the violent confrontation that erupted at Thornfield Plantation on September 10th. According to these accounts, Colonel Thornfield emerged from his study shortly after midnight, with a face transformed by fury beyond human recognition, dragging Solomon by the collar into the main hall, where he proceeded to interrogate the household staff one by one while brandishing both the decoded ledger and his military pistol. Housekeeper Mary Wilson testified that the colonel questioned each servant with increasing violence, striking those who hesitated to confirm the details of Mrs. Thornfield's and Miss Catherine's conduct, while forcing Solomon to kneel silently throughout the 5-hour ordeal. The most shocking incident, corroborated by multiple witnesses, occurred at dinner the following evening when Colonel Thornfield compelled his wife, daughter, and Solomon to sit together at the dining table, a profound violation of social boundaries that footman James Carter described as more terrifying than the physical violence that preceded it. The colonel reportedly read aloud from Solomon's decoded ledger, while requiring Eleanor and Catherine to face each other across the table, culminating in what cook Abigail Johnson called a terrible moment of recognition when mother and daughter simultaneously realized they shared the same secret. Solomon's own account of these events, written on 4 pages of Bible end paper and discovered hidden in a kitchen wall cavity during a 1934 renovation, provides the most haunting perspective. The master's eyes contained no humanity as he forced confirmation of his suspicions. When he commanded me to the dining table, I knew my death was certain, yet it was the silent exchange of horror between mother and daughter that truly conveyed the doom awaiting us all. As they realized their shared transgression, their mutual hatred filled the room more palpably than the colonel's rage. I understood then that I was but the instrument of their destruction, not its cause, trapped between powers beyond my control since the first day I was brought to this cursed household. Eleanor Thornfield's 11-page letter to her sister Margaret in Richmond, discovered in 1890 tucked inside a family Bible and now housed in the University of Virginia's special collections, provides the only first-hand account of her relationship with Solomon, written in her own words, without the filtering lens of subsequent investigators or court testimony. I cannot expect forgiveness for what society would deem my gravest sin, Eleanor wrote on September 11th, the day after the confrontation. Yet I find myself unable to truly repent what began as exploitation but transformed into the sole authentic connection I have experienced in my 17 years of marriage. The letter details with unflinching honesty how she initially used her position to compel Solomon's company during the colonel's frequent absences, acknowledging that no genuine consent can exist between mistress and slave, a truth I willfully ignored while convincing myself his eloquence and intelligence when discussing literature signified reciprocal feeling rather than survival strategy. As the correspondence continues, Eleanor describes the gradual evolution of their interactions, noting how conversations about Wordsworth and Byron gave way to confidences about our separate prisons, his visible and mine disguised as privilege. Most revealing is Eleanor's description of the escape she had planned for September 15th, having secured passage on a merchant vessel to Philadelphia through the harbor-master's assistant, whose silence I purchased with the last of my inheritance from mother. The letter confirms she had hidden traveling clothes, documents, and currency in the hollow base of a decorative urn in the East Garden, intending to flee with Solomon during the colonel's planned business trip to Savannah, completely unaware that her daughter had conceived a similar escape with the same man. I carry Solomon's child, a reality that would mean his death and my disgrace if we remain, she wrote, yet offers the possibility of a new existence in the North where, though we could never marry, we might live quietly as a family beyond the suffocating boundaries that have defined our existence here. The letter ends with a chilling premonition. Jeremiah knows everything now. I recognize in his methodical preparations not the chaotic rage of wounded pride, but the calculated vengeance of a military man planning an execution. We have perhaps hours, not days, before he enacts whatever terrible justice he has designed for us. Catherine's final diary entries, preserved by the colonel's sister who removed them from the plantation following the tragedy, reveal a disturbing transformation from love-struck girl to vengeful manipulator upon discovering her mother's relationship with Solomon. The betrayal cuts twice, Catherine wrote on September 11th, "For not only has mother claimed what I believed uniquely mine, but Solomon's duplicity proves he never truly saw me as more than another Thornfield woman to be placated and managed." Her initial shock quickly calcified into calculated revenge, with entries shifting from emotional outbursts to methodical planning within hours. "Father's rage requires careful nurturing to ensure proper justice," reads a particularly chilling passage, as his business mind might eventually calculate that quiet resolution would better preserve the family name. Court records containing the Colonel's statement to the magistrate reveal Catherine's devastating effectiveness, as she fabricated elaborate details about Solomon's supposed boasting among other enslaved workers about conquering both mistress and daughter, a claim contradicted by every household testimony but accepted without question by authorities. Elizabeth Wilson, a housemaid whose account appears in county archives, described witnessing Catherine whispering to her father for over an hour in his study, producing handkerchiefs of theatrical tears, while revealing invented details of increasingly violent and degrading encounters, after which the Colonel emerged with such terrible purpose that the very air around him seemed charged with death. Most damning is Catherine's own final diary entry, which displays a disturbing disconnect between her actions and their consequences. "I have ensured Solomon understands the cost of choosing mother over me. Father now views him not merely as a slave who overstepped boundaries, but as a calculating predator who deliberately destroyed his legacy and bloodline. Whatever punishment follows, I have the satisfaction of knowing it was my words that shaped it. In this, at least, I have claimed power that neither mother nor Solomon can contest." Reverend Thomas Blackwood, who visited the plantation on September 12th at the Colonel's request, later testified to Catherine's unnatural calmness as final preparations were made, noting with evident disturbance that she observed the proceedings with the detached interest of someone watching a theatrical performance rather than the unfolding destruction of multiple lives, including potentially her own. The events of September 13th, 1843, remain preserved through fragmentary accounts collected during the subsequent investigation, creating a mosaic of perspectives that suggest a night of orchestrated violence. Jonathan Mercer, owner of the neighboring Oak Haven plantation, provided a sworn statement describing how unearthly screams awakened his household shortly after midnight, sounds he initially attributed to wildcat or panther until their distinctly human quality became unmistakable. Mercer testified that the cries continued intermittently for approximately 20 minutes, before abruptly ceasing, but admitted he made no immediate investigation, considering it improper to intrude upon a neighbor's private affairs. The County Slave Patrol's logbook records an unusual entry from their midnight circuit. Observed lantern light moving from main house toward river on Thornfield property at approximately 2:15 a.m. Colonel Thornfield identified himself when hailed, stated he was investigating possible runaways, declined offered assistance. This account contrasts with stableboy Marcus Johnson's testimony that the Colonel had ordered the plantation's wagon prepared at dusk, specifically requesting the sturdy canvas usually reserved for transporting heavy goods to market. Most disturbing is the testimony of fisherman Caleb Washington, who reported seeing a small boat with a single oarsman navigating toward deeper water around 4 a.m., moving with purpose despite the moonless night, carrying what appeared to be several large bundled shapes covered in canvas. The Colonel's behavior the following morning displays an unsettling calm that Reverend Blackwood described as the serene demeanor of a man who had restored order to his domain. The magistrate's records confirm that Colonel Thornfield formally reported 3 runaways that afternoon, offering substantial rewards while declining the sheriff's offer to organize an immediate search party, stating with apparent confidence that they will have reached the coast by now, beyond our immediate reach. The official investigation into the disappearances, documented in Beaufort County court records, reveals the disturbing extent to which wealth and position shielded Colonel Thornfield from meaningful scrutiny, despite mounting evidence contradicting his account. Sheriff William Porter's initial report, dated September 15th, notes his cursory examination of the plantation lasting less than 3 hours, during which the colonel graciously provided refreshment while explaining the likelihood that his wife had succumbed to temporary madness brought on by her condition. Fleeing with their daughter and the educated slave who had manipulated both women's trust, Porter's notes make no mention of interviewing any household servants, a glaring omission later justified in correspondence with the magistrate as unnecessary given the colonel's comprehensive account and sterling reputation. When blood stains were discovered on the floor of Solomon's quarters by Reverend Blackwood during a pastoral visit on September 17th, the subsequent addendum to the investigation dismisses this evidence as likely resulting from punishment administered to another worker for unrelated infractions, despite the plantation's punishment ledger containing no corresponding entry. Most revealing is the treatment of testimony from 3 enslaved women who reported hearing sounds of struggle and a woman's pleading from the main house on the night in question, their accounts relegated to a single paragraph in the final report, characterized as unreliable recollections from individuals with limited comprehension. By September 30th, Magistrate Hargrove had officially accepted the colonel's narrative of 3 runaways, concluding that Eleanor Thornfield, in a state of maternal hysteria, convinced her impressionable daughter to flee with the assistance of the educated slave, likely harboring delusional hopes of reaching northern territories. This conclusion came despite the harbor master's records showing no unaccounted passengers on outbound vessels, no reported sightings by the extensive network of slave catchers notified of the escape, and the fisherman's account of mysterious bundles being transported downriver. The case was formally closed on October 7th, with a final notation from Hargrove that Colonel Thornfield bears this abandonment with remarkable Christian forbearance, requesting the matter be considered resolved so the unfortunate affair might fade from public attention, a gentleman's reasonable desire that this office is inclined to respect. The years following the disappearances marked a stark transformation of both Thornfield Plantation and its increasingly isolated master, documented through neighbors' correspondence, business records, and local newspaper accounts that chronicle a descent into ruin. By spring 1844, Colonel Thornfield had dismissed half his household staff and begun refusing social invitations, with Elizabeth Mercer writing to her cousin that Jeremiah now appears at church disheveled and reeking of spirits, speaking to no one and departing before the final hymn. Business ledgers from 1845 reveal a plantation in financial decline, cotton production falling by 30%, as the colonel redirected workers from field labor to construct what neighboring plantation owner Samuel Harrison described as a peculiar stone wall of considerable height encircling the entire property, built without apparent regard for the ruinous expense involved. Most disturbing were accounts of Thornfield's nighttime activities, with multiple sources describing how he maintained a pack of bloodhounds for nightly perimeter patrols, often observed by passing travelers as a solitary figure with lantern and rifle, accompanied by snarling beasts, traversing the wall's length from dusk until dawn. The Charleston Mercury's business pages tracked Thornfield's progressive financial collapse, noting in 1849 that once prominent planter Colonel J. Thornfield faces imminent foreclosure proceedings following multiple defaulted loans, while subsequent reports document the gradual selling of enslaved workers, livestock, and eventually furniture to maintain the crumbling estate. Most revealing is the account from Dr. Malcolm Blackwood, summoned to the plantation in November 1851, who found the colonel living in squalid conditions within a single room of the decaying mansion, surrounded by empty bottles and 3 portraits he had commissioned of his missing wife and daughter, their faces ritually slashed with what appeared to be a military blade. The final chapter in Thornfield's decline came on September 13, 1857, exactly 14 years after the disappearances, when the colonel's body was discovered by a bank representative arriving to serve final eviction papers. Local magistrate records indicate he had hanged himself from a rafter in the library, leaving a cryptic note that read only, I hear them in the walls at night. They have returned as I always knew they would. Dr. Margaret Wilson's archaeological survey of abandoned South Carolina plantations led to the most significant discovery in the Thornfield case on the 17th of June 1921, when her team uncovered an unusual stone structure nearly flush with the ground at the southeastern boundary of the former estate. University of South Carolina archives contain Wilson's field notes describing a circular foundation approximately 8 feet in diameter, constructed with remarkable precision from fitted stones unlike any other architectural feature on the property. Excavation revealed the structure marked a burial site containing 3 skeletons arranged in a manner Wilson characterized as ritualistic rather than practical, the male subject positioned between 2 female subjects, their arms appearing to have been bound at wrists and ankles with materials long since deteriorated. Medical examination by Charleston physician Dr. Thomas Blackwood confirmed 1 male skeleton approximately 30 to 35 years of age, and 2 female skeletons aged approximately 40 to 45 and 18 to 22 respectively, with the younger female showing evidence of pregnancy between 12 to 16 weeks gestation at time of death. Forensic analysis documented in Blackwood's report notes distinctive fracture patterns on all 3 skulls consistent with severe blunt force trauma and defensive injuries to the male subject's forearms, suggesting a struggle prior to death. The identification of the remains was confirmed through personal effects discovered with the bodies. A silver hairpin engraved with the initials E.T., found with the older female skeleton. A distinctive cameo brooch mentioned in multiple descriptions of Catherine Thornfield found with the younger female. And most significantly, a carved wooden button containing a hidden compartment that held a tightly folded scrap of paper bearing the name Solomon written in a careful hand. Wilson's subsequent investigation of county surveyor records revealed that the burial site lay almost precisely at the boundary of Thornfield Plantation, technically on neighboring property by approximately 3 feet, explaining why the bodies remained undiscovered during the construction of the Colonel's obsessive boundary wall. Her published findings in the Journal of Southern Archaeology concluded that Colonel Thornfield, with his military background and intimate knowledge of property boundaries, executed 3 individuals and deliberately buried them beyond his legal property line, creating a macabre technical truth behind his insistence to authorities that the missing persons were no longer on Thornfield land, while simultaneously maintaining them close enough to construct his wall as a form of perpetual guard post over their remains. The comprehensive forensic analysis conducted in 2018 by Dr. Eliza Montgomery's team at the University of South Carolina, applying modern techniques to evidence preserved since the 1921 excavation, has finally pieced together the complete sequence of events that culminated in the Thornfield tragedy. Soil samples from beneath the skeletons contained traces of distinctive canvas fibers, matching those used in plantation transport wagons, confirming the fisherman's account of bundled forms being transported by boat, while advanced imaging of the skull fractures revealed impact patterns consistent with the Colonel's military-issue rifle stock rather than a purpose-designed bludgeoning weapon, suggesting a rage-driven attack rather than premeditated execution. Most revealing was the discovery in 2019 of a previously overlooked hollow compartment in Eleanor's hairpin, containing a tightly folded map marking a route to the Charleston harbor with a specific dock location circled and a date, September 15, 1843, precisely matching details in her confession letter about planned escape. Catherine's sabotage of this plan became evident when researchers discovered a torn fragment of this same map among items catalogued with her remains, indicating she had discovered and partially destroyed her mother's escape route. DNA analysis performed on bone samples in 2020 confirmed both women were indeed pregnant when they died, with genetic markers establishing Solomon as the father in both cases, a scientific confirmation of the circumstantial case that had previously relied on diary entries and testimonies. The final piece of this historical puzzle emerged in 2020 when Dr. Montgomery discovered an unopened file box among Margaret Wilson's archived materials, containing Solomon's last letter written the night before the murders but never sent, in which he reveals, "I have gathered sufficient funds from secretly selling my carved figures to Charleston merchants to secure passage north and intend to flee alone before month's end. Unable to bear further exploitation by either mistress or daughter, both of whom now use their conditions to claim ownership of me beyond the legal bondage I already endure. That I have been forced to father children who would be born into the same system of bondage I have suffered haunts me beyond expression. I would rather die attempting escape alone than remain to witness this perpetuation of inherited chains.